was in the Ferens Art Gallery. I didn't get a chance to go and have a look at the open yet, so I thought, well, I'll go and have a look. And this is looking magnificent, by the way. But as I came out, there were these beautiful photographs up in another little space there in the Ferens, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And there was also a video spinning through of the artist involved, Andy Locke, talking about some of the processes behind the images as well. So these are lovely images. They've been acquired, these images, by the Ferens Art Gallery to help celebrate a big anniversary. The 8 photographs taken in 2003, I should say, are part of a series of photos of Orchard Park, capturing the abandoned Vernon House tower block before it was demolished. Well, let's chat more about this. One of the curators at the Ferens Art Gallery, Kerri Offord, is here now, and that artist, Andy Locke, is here as well. Good afternoon to both of you.
Hi there, Phil. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having us on.
Absolute pleasure. You there as well, Kerri? You've gone very quiet if you are.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Oh, that's all right. You are there. I'm pleased to hear from you both. We'll talk to Andy in a mo, but Kerri, just tell us a little bit about what's happening at the Ferens at the moment, because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, we've got a jam-packed summer, children everywhere, which is fantastic, and we're really busy. As you've said, we've got the Open and the Young Artists Open on, both of which have broken records for a number of artists entering, which is really exciting. But we also have Andy's fantastic works on display, which is a long time coming as they were acquired in the pandemic, in one of the lockdowns, so it's really exciting to finally have them on display.
Yeah, and Andy, these are not photos that you took any time recently, so these were taken back in 2003 and have, if I got this right, they've been exhibited elsewhere, but is this the first time in Hull?
It is, and the first thing I have to say is I just want to say thank you so much to Kerri and to Steph and to all the staff at the Ferens who've made this show possible, and also to the Friends of the Ferens as well, who really helped out with that. And this is the first time that the work has actually been exhibited in Hull, and I am just so delighted that this is an opportunity for the work to come back to the city where it was made. And 20 years on.
20 years on, and now joining, have I got this right, Kerri? These are now joining your part of your permanent collection.
Yes, they are part of our collection now for the next however many years the Ferens exists, hopefully forever, and they're a really great addition to the collection. For us, it's really important to represent Hull, but also to have amazing work. And I think when you see Andy's exhibition at the Ferens, it is absolutely stunning. So very worthy works to join the Ferens' collection.
I absolutely agree, and Andy, I mean, as a creative person myself, I'm finding myself more interested as time goes on in process almost rather than finished thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a finished thing, but actually the process, and you talking about the process behind these photos was something that really captured my imagination, because these are photos of photos.
Yes, they are photos of photos. That's quite right. Do you want me to try and describe that process?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, of course. So the first thing to say is these are analog photos. They're not digital photos. So they were made with a film camera, but not just with a film camera. It was a strange process that I ended up using, which gives them the appearance that they have, which is this very distinctive, quite haunting, but very vividly green sort of effect. And they're almost painterly as well. You can almost see brush strokes in them. And the reason for that is that what I did was that I made images in Vernon House when it was still standing using slide film, but then I projected those images using a slide projector onto these very, very big canvases that I'd painted in phosphorescent safety paint, the kind of safety paint that you have in buildings when the lights go out. And then I projected the slides onto those kind of phosphorescent canvases, and they charged up with the light from the projector, creating these very, very strange images that I then re-photographed using more film, another camera. And I had to do that. I had a very limited amount of time to do that. They only have a life, these phosphorescent images, of about an hour. So you have to catch them in that time before they disappear. And then the prints were made, the ones you see in the gallery, from the re-photographed canvases. So yeah, so it was a strange and slightly involved and complex process, but it gives them that very distinctive look that you're describing.
And these photographs, then, the original photographs were taken in 2003, or the retaken versions were taken in 2003. Which version are we talking about here, Andy?
Oh, they were all made back in 2003. Right. And yeah, so and these particular images, I mean, now you couldn't even make these images. You couldn't reprint them now because they were an entirely analog process. Yeah. And the infrastructure, the chemistry, the machines, the expertise is still there, but the infrastructure that would have allowed you to make these images in this way just doesn't even exist anymore. So these are these are the original prints that go right back to that time, to 2003.
And what else were you doing around Orchard Park at the time then? Because these are specifically about the Vernon House Tower block, aren't they? Was this part of a much bigger project you were doing at the time?
I was fascinated by, and I still am to some extent, by the architecture, that post-war architecture of the 1960s, 1960s really, that kind of embodied that sort of post-war era of optimism and newness and modernism. And I think, like a lot of people of my generation, I was looking back on that. I was kind of really fascinated by the way that those buildings embodied the aspirations and the optimism of that era. But then I was really fascinated by the legacy of that optimism, and the way that those buildings and the way that their subsequent histories, some of which, the histories you see in the images are personal histories because they're all about the spaces that people lived in, the homes that they inhabited. But in a way, by doing that, I'm looking at the way that history unfolded around those buildings and the way that they ended up, in a sense, living in a changed world. And obviously, we know that Vernon House was eventually demolished back in 2004, I think. So in some ways, it's a fascination with that history. And I photographed a lot of the architecture, a lot of the buildings around Hull. For example, the Plain Street Church as well, the Methodist Church on Plain Street, which obviously suffered a similar fate, but which really fascinated me as well. So yeah, in a way, Orchard Park, although I wasn't out there trying to make a piece of work about the estate, about Orchard Park, there was a fascination there with those, with the buildings of that era and the way that they were a part of the fabric of the city.
Kerri, let me ask you about the job you do. Is an interesting one, because it strikes me just listening to Andy talk there that there's a real kind of continuity between you and previous sort of curators at the Ferens, and indeed at other art galleries around the country, because over time, presumably, you all had this similar sort of thing. You are collecting artworks, you are collecting photography in this particular instance, but you are, in many cases, you are kind of custodians of a timeline.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to remember that art and fine art, as it's often described as, is basically the visual representation of social history. So when you look at Ferens's collection, it goes back to the 1300s, and yet it documents really important parts of our history, of our lived experience, of our lives. And I think this is why acquiring Andy's work is really important as well, because it is really relatable and it gives you this memory, even if you have no relationship to Orchard Park. We all have those moments when we move out of our home and pack everything up, and it becomes something more than the place that you've lived your life every day. And I think that's what really comes across in Andy's work. So it works really well with the collection, with our Dutch masters as well, and that insight into interior and how we go about our daily lives.
Really, it's a great time to go to the Ferens any time, but really great at the moment with the two excellent open art exhibitions and your exhibition there as well, Andy. It must be weird for you, kind of, excuse me, So a little cough there. It must be really weird for you revisiting something that, from 2003 and talking about that, because presumably now, you, in artistic terms, you must have moved on to whole new pastures, have you?
Yeah, I guess I have, and I think it is really interesting. When you make a piece of work, you never really make it with with that sense of what its history might be and how it might come back to be a part of your life. And so it's really interesting coming back to Orchard Park 20 years on, because of course I see it now in the context of all the work that I've made since and the different histories that I've followed. And, and I see the work at the time when I made the work. I was fascinated by what I was finding in these apartments and the things that I was photographing. And I realise now a lot of the work that I've made since has been about silences and about things that are unspoken and unsaid, for example, in families and in different kinds of institutions. And I look back at the Orchard Park work now, and I see it through that lens, and I see it as a part of that history of making this bigger body of work, which has taken on these themes that are much more personal. And I realised that actually it was as much the things that I brought to Vernon House, as much as what I found there, that those images are actually about. So you never know down the line how you're going to be, how you might reinterpret and re-understand works that you thought you understood when you made them.
Thanks, Andy. It's a lovely exhibition. It really is. It's well worth going to the Ferens over the summer holiday if you're heading into town this weekend, for example, Friday for the Dino Festival.